Welcome back to Missing. I am Tim here today with Lance. Lance, how are you today?
I'm doing fantastic today, Tim. The episode that we have coming up is part 2 of a two-parter that we first aired yesterday, and it was important to us to break this up because there was a lot of information that happened, and this is sort of the transitioning point of that information where it gets into this sort of controversial territory. But Tim, before we get to that, how are you?
Doing good over here. Yeah, excited to hear what folks think of this two-parter on the disappearance of Carolyn Pruyser. Of course, she went missing on May 17th, 1984 from Alberta, Canada. If you have any information, please call the Royal Canadian Mounted Police at 780-624-6677. And again, after the conversation with Laura Riste, we will be back for our final thoughts where we share our opinions and sort of just discuss the case a little bit.
All right, we're going to take a quick break for commercial, and we will be right back with Laura Riste. And be sure to follow us on social at MissingCSM.
Were there any other persons of interest or suspects that were considered?
Yes. My sense in it is that Carolyn stopped for someone in authority. So I always believed, and I mean not since I was 7 years old, but later on when I got more interested in this case as an adult, and could look through the case history and the specifics of it. To me, Carolyn was stopped by a police officer. She wasn't afraid. She pulled over. She rolled her window partway down. There were no signs of a struggle. I believe a police officer pulled her over that night, and the police officer is the one that is responsible for Carolyn's disappearance and likely murder.
Wow.
Okay, now the police officer that was in the cruiser who this guy without insurance claims followed Carolyn, that person has never been identified?
No.
Okay. Now, I guess, is it possible that wasn't an official police cruiser that he was driving?
I believe it was an official police cruiser. I believe it was an officer from another detachment that had come to Peace River and was likely plugging the gap, filling in for somebody because that detachment was short-staffed. And I believe that they did something to her, and that's it. Now, a retired senior officer for the Edmonton Police Service, he believes that the fellow in the uninsured Buick is innocent, and his opinion was that he was not involved at all. He only got mixed up in this because he was one of the last ones to see Carolyn at the store. And he was not happy at all with the RCMP investigation, and he believes, as I do, that Carolyn stopped for a police officer the night she vanished.
Interesting. And how many police officers, I know you mentioned some will borrow from other nearby towns, but like how many are employed at any given time back then?
I'm not sure that how many that they had employed at the detachment in Peace River. There is a photo of Harry Danilick. He was the first on scene and second in command when Carolyn went missing. There was another officer by the name of Rick Chapman and another one by the name of Gordon Pitt. So there were definitely 3.
In an article that we referenced earlier about foul play, Carolyn's father had said that there's still hope that she's alive. And the quote is that we have some leads that some things were going on in town that night that shouldn't have been going on. What was he talking about there?
It could be the black truck from Manning and the dark-haired man in the black truck. That was one of the things that was going on, where he again was the fellow that was supposedly stalking women. Carolyn had seen him on more than one occasion. Her friend had seen him before, and he had actually later followed that lady home, but that happened after Carolyn disappeared. There was also another incident that was somehow linked to Carolyn's disappearance. There was a bus driver that was making homemade pornography videos. And he was into bestiality and having sex with farm animals and things like that. How he got caught up in this is when he was filming this porn, the Peace River School Division was on his school bus, and that was captured in one of the frames in this pornography film. So that was how he ended up tied to it, because he was obviously some kind of pervert. You know, not necessarily does that transcend into kidnapping and murder, but that was another thing that was going on at the time.
Yeah, that's very strange behavior and kind of high risk behavior too, with the bus in the background.
That was happening at the same time. And that footage somehow ended up in the hands of somebody that showed it at their stag party.
What?
So yes.
Like a bachelor party?
Yeah, like a bachelor party.
What, on like VHS or?
Well, yeah, it would have been VHS at the time. Yeah.
And was this like well known in the town? Like
Well, it wasn't well known. People didn't really like to talk about it, definitely, and especially that somebody that you're trusting with transporting your children to and from school, because there was a picture of the school bus in one of the frames of this sick video, so.
Well, I mean, I guess I'd be more concerned if he was transporting my farm animals.
Definitely, but still, he's a person of trust. He's in a trust position. He's transporting children to and from school. He's obviously got a few screws that need to be tightened, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Wow.
And was he suspected?
Yes, just because of his sick behavior. But he was suspected at the time, but it was more along the lines of, okay, this guy is weird, so let's see now if his behavior could somehow transcend into Carolyn's disappearance and potential murder. But it did not go anywhere. I think they just labeled him as sick and twisted and left it at that. But it was something that they would have talked about in the town, but it would have been whispered, like it would have been not spoken about in polite conversation.
Now, is there any truth to her father claiming that the car stalled and whoever came to help her is responsible?
Well, her car in one article was, or I should say her father's car, was reported to be in poor condition. But when they got in the car, when it was found abandoned and turned the key, it fired right up.
Right. So that's almost like kind of trying to prove a negative, right? The obvious conclusion or the obvious scenario that can be presented that is easy to understand is, like you said in the beginning, somebody of a authority or trusting position pulled her over and she was trusting enough to roll the window down to communicate with them. So
Yes.
I'm not trying to say police were involved or not, but if you're saying, well, the car probably stalled, well, now you're just trying to prove the negative. You don't know if the car stalled.
If the car had any sort of issue, like stalled or whatever, Carolyn likely would have taken her purse, rolled the window up, taken her purse, taken the keys, locked the door, and walked home.
Right. How far from home was she?
She was about halfway there. So if she had headed out on foot, she probably would have been home within 20 minutes, half an hour. Mind you, it was dark, but she could have navigated her way home on foot.
Right, right. And again, now we're trying to kind of force a scenario that is likely tough to force because, oh, someone just happened to be waiting.
The other option is she could have turned around, walked the other way, walked back to town,
Back to the store.
found a payphone, and said, phone mom and dad, hey, the car's screwed. I'm in town, can somebody come and pick me up? But she would have grabbed her purse, she would have secured the vehicle, and then she either would have walked home or walked back to town.
Right. And she also had the knowledge that there was a police officer at the store. So maybe she would have said, hey, a police officer might be able to help me here.
Yes.
Interesting.
Yeah, so her purse was found in the car. Was her identification still in the purse?
Yes, everything was in her purse, even the $7 that she had. There was nothing taken.
With the window being down, you could definitely see how that would be a potential police stop. But I feel like maybe her ID would have been out, like, because that's the first thing that happens is they ask for ID.
They stop you, they come over, they ask for your license, your registration from the vehicle. Most people keep it in the glove compartment, that sort of thing. But no, there was nothing disturbed or moved.
I gotta say, if I was at 19 years old, if a police officer pulled me over and came up and just simply said, "I need you to get out of the car," I
Yes,
probably would just get out of the car. I
me too.
probably,
Yeah,
yeah.
me too. Yeah.
And if a police officer had the intention, or anybody had the intention of going up to her and abducting her or doing, any foul play here, that person's probably not going to want to touch as many things as possible. Probably going to try to not touch as many things as possible. So asking for the license or the registration means that fingerprints are going to be on that. And I apologize if you already mentioned this. Did they dust for fingerprints?
I believe so, yes. Didn't find anything, but likely her family's fingerprints, her father's, her own, potentially her mother's. But even if the police officer had pulled Carolyn over and just went up to the car, Carolyn rolled the window down, he could have said, "Hey, you need to come out here and look at this. I want to show you something here, maybe on the back of your car, whatever. Carolyn, okay, officer. She gets out of the car and then he grabs her. But I definitely would have gotten out of the car for a police officer at that age myself. So
I mean, I would this age.
I definitely would not now.
But you're right. Like he could have said, "There's something happening here with the trunk of your car. There's something
yeah,
happening with the back tire."
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's possible she could have got out got out of the car without going through the normal process. Now, were there any, I guess, signs of anywhere that she could have been, like her remains could have been?
Well, Gary in his blog, he talks about this fellow that he interviewed that said that there was an unmarked fresh grave. These two guys were out hunting, and they were in the Manning area, I believe. And again, this is on the Gary Poignant point57.wordpress.com about a freshly dug grave that they had spotted, and also a cabin in the area where they spent a couple nights while they were out hunting and they were just watching for game. And they encountered later the person that owned this cabin, and the person that owned this cabin warned them to stay away from it and everything. They didn't let on that they'd already spent a couple nights there, but warned them to stay away from this cabin. And this cabin, I guess, was full of porn.
Jeez. Why did they warn them to stay away? Just because it's private property?
This fellow warned him to stay away from the property. Yes, because it was private, and there were things that he did up there.
This is a different guy from the bus driver.
Yes, this is not the bus driver. This is a different person.
So there's another person who has some deviant type behavior that's going on.
Yes. As well as a fresh grave on his property.
Okay, so that was on his property or near his property. Was that fresh grave area searched?
I believe the RCMP were made aware of it, yes. I don't know if they had actually gone and searched it or not, or if they just claimed that they did.
So when did the investigation and the search start to peter out?
Well, the search began right away, but probably within a month when they found no evidence of Carolyn. They did do that special in the summer of 1984 where they showed the CCTV footage from the gas station where Carolyn had been in to purchase these cigarettes, and that man had been behind her to purchase his.
They didn't find any cigarettes of that brand, like around the car or around any of... No. Okay.
No.
And what about any sightings of Carolyn?
There was a sighting of her in Whitecourt, Alberta. It was the morning after she disappeared, approximately 5 a.m., Whitecourt, Alberta is about 3 hours from Peace River, and she was sighted in a car.
Okay, so possible for her to have gotten that far. Was the sighting ever ruled out or confirmed as
The
being her or
police
anything?
say that they ruled it out. It was not Carolyn.
Are there more bits of evidence that there were these types of individuals, with this deviant behavior in that area?
Well, like I said, I would imagine that there were more people with deviant behavior, but they haven't come to light in regards to Carolyn's disappearance. The fellow that I think was potentially responsible, he's a now retired Mountie. He was posted in Edson, Alberta at the time that she disappeared, but we can't track him to where he was going to other detachments to fill in and work at the time. We've tracked him to Innisfail, Alberta, Red Deer, Alberta, and Sherwood Park, Alberta. So we know that at various times he had gone to those three places in order to fill in at various detachments. He claims to have never worked in Peace River ever. He claims to have driven through it on his way somewhere else. And when questioned further, he threatened legal action if his name was ever printed or spoken. So we're kind of left with that. And that also appears on the blog of Gary Poignant.
So who interviewed him?
Gary did.
Okay, so Gary performed the interview, and that's when he said that he'd never been there and he'd been deployed in all these areas.
But he has been tracked to these three other places where he
Yep.
did go fill in and work. And yes, he was posted in Edson. But what we're trying to say is just because you were posted in Edson doesn't mean that you necessarily only worked in Edson. If they needed you somewhere else, then you went somewhere else. Edson's about 4 hours from Peace River.
Is it typical to post somebody that far away?
Apparently it was at this point in time because Edson, Alberta, is quite a distance to Innisfail and Red Deer also. So, within the parameters of 3-4 hours, apparently if they thought that they needed somebody and they could pull them from another detachment, then that's what their practice was. And they claim that the claim is that this is why they can't 100% pin down who pulled Carolyn over that night if that happened, because it was likely somebody working from another detachment.
So strange to me how there's like no paper trail of like who that would have been or where
Well,
these
in the
people are.
1980s, we were moving into the computer age, but everything was paper at that point. There was paper, everything. You think that they would have known who was on staff that night, who was patrolling where, who would have issued what ticket, if any, and who would have potentially pulled somebody over. But they didn't have a computer in the actual cruiser like they do now. Everything was paper.
Well, would it be possible for this person to have the cruiser on them even if they were off duty?
That is possible, yes. I do know that just from my own experience that there are some RCMP officers that have the cruiser parked at their own residence when they go home for the evening.
Right, so it could have been an off-duty.
So it is possible that he was off shift at the time.
Right, with no one documenting his whereabouts or the cruiser's whereabouts.
Now, where did he live though? Did he live nearby or did he live 4 hours away?
Yeah, he was posted in Edson. But if he was working in Peace River, helping out at the detachment, he could have been living anywhere. He could have been staying somewhere temporarily. It just could have depended how long they needed him for, whether they needed him for a few weeks, a month, 6 months, whatever. But it's been substantiated that this individual had gone and worked at other detachments, so it's not far out of the realm to presume that it could have been a thing where he had gone to Peace River to work for a time.
And we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program. Now, did he have any reports of bad behavior as a police officer?
Not that we can find out. We're not privy to that information. No, we can't even release his name. Can't even be released because he pulled the legal action card.
What put him on the radar in the first place?
Well, that would probably be a question for Gary Pointet, the fellow that has this blog and was the reporter for the Edmonton Journal.
Okay, interesting. So something put this guy with
On the radar.
Yeah, I mean, he's got no reputation for bad behavior. There's no indication. Like, seems like a responsible reporter is not just going to throw a dart at a wall of names and be like, "Here's the Mountie police that I'm going to go after."
I haven't reached out to Gary to ask him what this fellow's name is, so I could do my own research on it. I kind of left that out. I am toying with the possibility of talking to him, though, to see if he will release the individual's name and to see what I can potentially find out about him. But according to Gary, that he pulled the legal action card if anyone spoke his name, if it was seen in print or anything like that. There was going to be repercussions.
Well, where is the case today? It seems like still some people do cover it, but there aren't too many answers.
We had the 40th anniversary of her disappearance. That would have been last year in 2024. So a few articles popped up. It hasn't been covered a lot on podcasts, aside from this one, maybe two. There is one lady that has a podcast called Disturbing the Peace, and she talks about cases of missing people, unsolved crimes, and so on in the Peace River area. I believe she's from Grand Prairie, Alberta. And she's done a podcast about Carolyn last year, right around the 40th anniversary of her disappearance. And then that's when Gary started blogging about it too. Was last year around the 40th anniversary. He covered this case a lot working for the Edmonton Journal. And I remember seeing it on the news as a child growing up. We only had the local newspapers, so I don't believe it was ever featured there. But it was featured on a Have You Seen Me poster. There used to be a Have You Seen Me poster hanging up at the local post office in town. And I remember seeing Carolyn in her graduation gown on the poster there or whatever. So, yes. But no, there's been no new information. I did reach out to there's a Carolyn Pruyser Facebook group. I did reach out to her family to see if any of them would be interested in talking to me about Carolyn, and nobody did. They kind of said they're trying their best to move on. Carolyn's father and mother are long since deceased. So they went to their grave without knowing on this earth what happened to their daughter, but hopefully they're reunited with her now. So, and Carolyn's one sister has passed away, the one that was the teacher at Peace River High School when Carolyn went missing.
Wow. So there's not many people left connected directly to Carolyn.
No, just her good friends from high school that still remember her and hold her in high regard. Talk about what a happy, bubbly person she was and what a great laugh she had. They share some photos of her, some good memories they had growing up, and so on. Like, it's quite common to have a lot of iron in your well water, and I guess Carolyn washed her hair one time, and the iron in the water turned her hair green. So there was a funny story about that, and she just had her whole life ahead of her. And they miss what she might have been, what she might have done if this hadn't happened to her.
Well, I'm glad you shared that piece of personal information about her, because we try to do that just to humanize all of the missing persons that we cover, and you not having a direct connection to her. It's really cool that her friends were able to give you that bit of information. It's
Yes.
so tragic to me to think that years have gone by, decades have gone by, her family members are passing, and someone has gotten away with something.
Yes. But I believe Carolyn wasn't afraid of the person that she pulled over for. Growing up, I mean, Carolyn is 12 years older than me, but growing up, police officers, they were the safe people. If you needed help, you found a police officer. You had nothing to fear from them. They're the ones that get the bad guys. They're not the bad guys.
Right. Wow. Well, Laura, thank you so much for sharing Carolyn's story here with us today. Very tragic and quite mysterious.
It is, but you're more than welcome. But like I said, it's keeping the missing alive and shining a light into the darkness. And I believe they could have caught Carolyn's killer a long time ago. Potentially was the investigation bungled. You have the fellow from Manning with dark hair in the dark truck. You have the other fellow that later lived in Manning with the uninsured brown Oldsmobile. Then you have the police officer. Then you have the fellow that was into bestiality and pornography and was also a school bus driver. And then you have this person with a cabin way up in the middle of nowhere full of porn and a freshly dug grave.
No shortage of decent suspects, I would say.
No, but definitely anyone that's interested, check out Gary's blog. And he did a series of 3 articles about Carolyn's disappearance, and it's very interesting. And again, he was a reporter for the Edmonton Journal.
All right, Lance, we're back here for final thoughts after the interview with Laura Riste about the disappearance of Carolyn Pruyser. Quite a mysterious case, no shortage of suspects, and we're going to go over every one that was mentioned by Laura in the interview. Laura delivers again, Lance.
Yeah, every time she comes on, she gets a little bit more... I want to say animated. I think back to the original conversations that we've had with her about Trenny Gibson, and she was very textbook in her delivery of the information, which is amazing. But the more we've gotten to know her, the more the stories that she brings to us, the more of her personality starts to come out as well, which I really like, because then we can start to incorporate that into our final thoughts. We can incorporate that into our theories and how we are processing what she's telling us and processing her theories, because she has, I think, a pretty strong theory about this one, who she thinks is responsible for Carolyn's disappearance. But yeah, it's a true mystery, and it's one of those ones that, like, we've talked about numerous times with a number of missing persons, right back to Maura Murray. Single car accident, no sign of anybody at the scene, no reasonable or legitimate sighting afterward. Brianna Maitland, Brandon Lawson, Jason Landry. The list is pretty extensive as far as cars that are found abandoned on the side of a road under mysterious circumstances. And this one has those little, like, earmark clues that armchair detectives, and I mean that in the best possible way, like Laura, will really hold on to, like the proverbial dog with a bone.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, let's go over the night of Carolyn's disappearance, kind of point by point, and then we'll get into some of the suspects here. The night that Carolyn went missing, she went to a convenience store before dropping her friend off at her home. So this was around midnight on a Thursday night. There was an account of a sandwich shop that appears not true, but that was discussed in part 1. So we know that Carolyn definitely stopped for cigarettes at this convenience store before dropping her friend off. And then her friend would know about the man who approached her and Carolyn in the car. So Carolyn's friend would have a first-person account of that, if that's true, and how that went down. But we'll get to that person in a little bit. So then Carolyn drove her friend home, which was close. I think it was about a 10-minute drive. And so Carolyn, after dropping off her friend, was heading home over Kaufman Hill Road. She had a quarter tank of fuel. Her car was left with her purse on her seat, on the passenger seat, keys in the ignition, driver's side window partially rolled down, partial boot print on the driver's side door. No signs of a struggle, but she never made it home. Really interesting condition to find the car left in. Mysteries abound really just in that description, right? Quarter tank fuel. We talked about whether or not she ran out of gas like Brandon Lawson's car. Didn't happen. Doesn't sound like the car stalled either because it started up as soon as the police tried to start it, I believe the very next day. Purse on the passenger seat, confusing to me. Her ID in the purse, which we kind of went over a little bit as far as like what the order of events would be if you're pulled over by a police officer. Window partially rolled down, keys in ignition, and then the boot print on the door. So presumably she got out of the car on her own, right? Because otherwise there may have been a sign of struggle or signs of a struggle if she was like pulled through the window, for example. The window was only partially rolled down unless her abductor, and I'll just say that clearly like as a fact because I think that's what happened. So her abductor probably didn't pull her out of that window unless this person went back and rolled the window back up after and changed the way that the car was left, right? So no signs of a struggle. So she got out of the car probably on her own accord, and then went missing. But it still is a little confusing with the boot print on the door, as Laura went over. Maybe that's like you're walking away and you kind of kick the door closed, or you hit it with your rear end or something. If you're carrying shopping bags or something like that, we've all done that. But the boot print is a little more interesting in that we technically don't know when the boot print was made, but I think it's probably safe to assume it was made then, right?
Yeah.
Those are plenty of mysteries just right there. And then her father, the next morning, noticed that Carolyn and the car weren't home. So he called around, but no one had any idea where she was. And then he sort of retraced her steps and went over Kaufman Hill Road and found the abandoned car and instantly believed that something bad had happened. And so that was kind of discussed with Laura. The reason why they didn't kind of pursue other angles, like a runaway or something like that, is because Carolyn's father pushed so hard that this was an abduction, and the police seemed to agree.
Yeah, I don't see how this could be interpreted as anything other than an abduction. Because if she wanted to go away, she would have just driven away.
Right.
I mean, the car wouldn't have been found like that. Very interesting about the purse. So whatever got her out of the car did not require her to bring her purse. Whatever that instance was that got her out of the car. So I think where our heads go, of course, and Laura's head went there, and she's probably going to analyze this until she can disprove it, but having a police officer pull you over, not ask for your license or registration. I don't know what a 19-year-old young woman would think when a police officer pulls you over and you look in your rearview mirror and they're coming up. Are you rolling your window down at the time, or are you fumbling around trying to find your registration? Does she have a registration in her glove compartment? Is she getting her license ready? But if the police officer were to just say to her, "You were swerving back there, I need you to step out of the car so I can do a field sobriety test," or "Your taillight is out, I want you to check this out," or "There's something that seems to be wrong with the back of your car, I want you to check this out." So she gets out of the car. Something happens there where the person hits her or chokes her out or something like that, so there can't be that much of a struggle. What I'm saying is, if there's no obvious sign of a struggle, whatever happened to get her out of the car and into another vehicle had to have been so fast that didn't have the ability to fight back. Maybe the person pulled a gun and forced her into another vehicle. But if there's no obvious sign of struggle, it's either a gun and she's afraid for her life, or she's not capable of fighting back. The boot print on the door can only tell me that he's holding her. And he needs his foot to shut the door, and he needs it to be over fast, because if he's holding a gun to her, he's using his hip He's using, some other body part to just simply get the door shut. He's not using his foot. His foot is only being used because his hands are full, right?
Yeah, unless he's trying to avoid fingerprints.
Unless he's trying to avoid fingerprints, but then use your hip, use your elbow,
Yeah, there's less identifying parts of your body you could use than your boot. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's why there was no items taken from inside the car, or there was nothing that was displaced inside of the car. So whoever it was trying to avoid touching as much, personal items as possible because of the fingerprints. I didn't think about this until listening back. Maybe the thinking on this is backwards, because we're talking about this witness who was a suspect. Can I say still is a suspect, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. This witness who is a suspect is the one that created this police officer.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Right. So maybe our thinking's backwards. Maybe this person pulls her over, follows her, she drops off her friend, pulls Carolyn over. Maybe he's impersonating a police officer.
That definitely occurred to me as a possibility, and it wouldn't be without precedent. That happens. People can have flashing lights in their car that they can put on the top of it and make them...
All you have to do is flash your high beams a few times at a car that's driving and get them to pull over.
Yeah, but you could even have a light, I mean, I actually remember a friend of mine who had one of those and, back in high school.
You get them at a toy store.
And that's a very dangerous thing. That's a very serious offense, impersonating a police officer. And so you would think if you're going to do that, you're going to commit a crime, a serious crime. So that's a possibility in my head.
Yeah, I am more on that side of the fence now, thinking about it, because this individual created this character of a police officer when he was being interviewed. And he even goes out of his way to say, I told them that there was a police officer over there. So
yeah,
did that moment even happen, or is he just further elaborating on this character that he's putting in this situation?
Right. Well, that's why I mentioned that Carolyn's friend would know if that happened or not. So I think it did happen. And Laura seems pretty certain of that as well.
That there was a police officer? You think that there was a police officer there?
It sounds like it, yeah. But I will say that this suspect said that the police officer followed Carolyn's car. And so if we go through the steps of that night, she then went to her friend's house to drop her friend off. It was a 10-minute drive, and then it was another 10 minutes or so back over Kaufman Hill Road for Carolyn to go home. So had that happened, that police officer would have been following Carolyn and her friend all the way to her friend's house, where Carolyn stopped to let her friend out. I find it very hard to believe that it wouldn't have been a conspicuous following if that's what happened, If a police officer's following you for, 10 kilometers, I think it was, they'd probably pull you over if they're following you specifically. I don't know why they'd be following you if there wasn't something that they suspected, like maybe you were drinking, or maybe there was something, maybe that he thought you were speeding or something like that, But it seems like her friend would have known if this police officer was in the parking lot, if that man came up to them and told them that the police officer was in the parking lot, and then if the police officer or the car followed them, she would have known, and it would have been presented, I think, as part of the story here. So I'm a little unclear on that.
Yeah, no, you're going down the right path, I think, because if you're following somebody, if you're a legit police officer and you think that somebody has been drinking and you're following them to find out if they're swerving or driving erratically or something to indicate that they're drinking, you're following them for 10 kilometers. That's over 6 miles. If you're following somebody as a police officer trying to figure out if they're driving recklessly, you have 6 miles to determine that. And she wasn't pulled over in those 6 miles. So whoever's following her, you've now eliminated the checking for reckless driving, because she wasn't reckless driving, because she wasn't pulled over in those 6 miles.
Right. And you would think it wasn't a case of a broken taillight or something like that, too, because it likely would have been seen earlier.
Yeah, she would have been pulled over. She would have been pulled over as she left the parking lot of the convenience store if there was something wrong with her car. That was illegal enough or unsafe enough for a police officer to pull her over. So where does that leave us? It leaves us with someone, whether it's a police officer or not, following her for another reason.
Right. Or not following at all.
Or not following her at all.
Again, that is based on the suspect account, basically. So yeah, so let's go over these suspects real quick. So this suspect that we're talking about now drove a brown 1977 Oldsmobile or Buick, which I think was kind of the same GM, company at that point. Apparently a blonde-haired guy who interrupted Carolyn while she was buying cigarettes at the convenience store. And then Carolyn left the convenience store with her cigarettes. The man approached Carolyn and her friend in Carolyn's vehicle, and he said, quote, "Be careful, there's a police officer nearby." And I guess he pointed to the vehicle in the parking lot. And the man didn't leave the parking lot because he claimed he didn't have car insurance, which is a kind of a crime. I don't know how serious of a crime. It's certainly different levels, I think, in different areas, but that's interesting, I would note. And then he claimed that the officer followed Carolyn out of the parking lot, and then he left a few minutes later. And then he claims that he saw red and blue police flashing lights on Kaufman Hill Road on his way home. And you had asked if that timing would work out, if he had hung out in the parking lot, and if he could even have seen police flashing lights on Kaufman Hill Road from his vantage point. And the answer was yes on both of those, that it would work out. It could work out. But he was also later polygraphed. He never mentioned the results of the polygraph. Years later, he was actually taken into custody for a domestic incident involving his girlfriend. So I'm assuming there that he got violent, or it was some kind of fight with him and his girlfriend. If not, he actually just hit her. And then Officer Harry Daniluk believes that he is the killer. Laura mentioned that the man also wouldn't say, "I didn't kill Carolyn." He only said, "I had F all to do with it." And it's unclear who the police officer in the parking lot that followed Carolyn was. No confirmation that this is even a true account.
Right.
So really interesting stuff there. Yeah, it's almost like that guy's lying and is the abductor, or he's telling the truth and there was some unknown cop there. Very hard for me to believe that there was just an unknown cop there, though, who is apparently on duty.
Right.
And no police officer ever claimed to be that police officer. No police officer from the area ever claimed to pull Carolyn over.
Right. Yeah, there's no record of any police officer like reporting that or documenting a pulling over anybody right then and there that night. When she was in the store and she was sort of interrupted by this suspect, it was stated that Carolyn gave him sort of a stink eye. So he stood out to her. So she gets in her car, and then apparently he approaches the car and says, "Careful, there's a police officer there." He says that to Carolyn and her friend. So what's her friend saying after that? Who's okay? That's interesting. That guy, thanks, sir. Whatever. Carolyn's naturally going to say to her friend, "That guy like cut in front of me in line," or whatever. Like whatever he did.
Yeah, he interrupted.
Yeah, he interrupted her. Like if it was so obvious that she gave him a look in the convenience store that it was actually documented, Carolyn's definitely talking to her friend about it. Oh, that guy interrupted me in line. I don't know what this guy's deal is. So I would be really interested to find out, if at all possible, what that conversation was in the car.
Totally.
As they're driving home. Right. Also, I want to point out, I didn't think of it until you mentioned the fake police light. If this guy is responsible for it, of course he's going to say, "I saw a red and blue police light going," because if other people saw it too and it was his, it's going to back up his story. You know what I mean?
Right.
So he's got to he has to introduce that. If anybody else is questioned, if anybody drove by, if any other home saw it, he needs to say there was a light that looked like a police car after pulling somebody over. I saw what looked like police lights. Because
flashing lights.
If he is responsible, he's the one that did it.
Yeah, so a very suspicious account, in my opinion. And again, I know we mentioned it in the conversation, but the police would probably have a better idea than us, because they would be able to confirm if he was lying or telling the truth about some of these things. Again, no police said they ever pulled her over. So he's either making up that account or he saw someone there with flashing lights. And, we don't know who that would have been.
Yeah, just real quick, just kind of speculating on the fly here. If a police officer wanted to pull her over with ill, intent, why are they leaving their lights on? Why are they drawing attention to the scene? If their purpose was to follow her, she's alone now, the opportunity comes up to pull her over. Yeah, pull her over with the lights, flash them once or twice so she pulls over, but then turn them off. Why are you drawing attention to it if your goal is to abduct her?
Yeah, it's a fair question.
And we'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors.
Thanks to our sponsors, and now we're back to the program. Okay, so suspect number 2 was a dark-haired man in a black truck, and he was from Manning, Alberta, which is about an hour away from Peace River. And Carolyn noticed that he had followed her more than once. So this guy was stalking her and her friend. She noticed him that night, apparently, and had said to her friend she's seen him around, following her around with that black truck. And then apparently after Carolyn went missing, the guy was driving aggressively behind a woman. He was following a different woman, and the woman called police, and apparently the police were able to find out who this was. They contacted him, and he told them that he thought she was cute and he wanted to ask her out. That's why he was driving aggressively and following her behind her. And police said there wasn't enough evidence to bring him in for questioning. Kind of disagree there. I kind of think that's enough evidence. I mean, maybe we didn't know how serious stalking was back in 1984, but if you're being stalked by a random person, that could very easily lead to violence. Now, I did look up some stalking statistics and really couldn't find one on stranger stalking. It's mostly the statistics that lead to violence that you can easily find are mostly about like exes and things like that oftentimes leads to violence. But so I couldn't really find one on a stranger, but that's scary. And she wasn't the only person this guy was stalking.
Right. But the police are kind of left in an unfortunate position there because there was no actual crime that was committed. I mean, stalking is so hard to actually prove. So they did question him, and he did say, I thought she was cute. I wanted to ask her out. I'm awkward, blah, blah, blah. I don't know how to do these sort of things because I'm a dumb guy. And, if that happens again, he can just say yeah, oh God, I'm sorry. But if he hasn't damaged any property or threatened in any way verbally or physically, I can see police officers having to let him go and even shaking their heads and being like, I wish we could do something more, but he hasn't done anything technically wrong.
Well, they could have questioned him. He did. Stalking is definitely illegal. Again, not as widely known how dangerous back in 1984, but the police called the woman who reported this and said that, oh, he just thought you were cute and wanted to ask you out. What happened during the phone call with the guy from Manning? They were just broing down with him. Oh yeah, we get it.
Yeah.
We get it. There's cute women driving around. Come on. Be a police officer.
I hope that's not the case. I hope that they said to her, this is what he said. Unfortunately, we can't do anything further because he hasn't we hear that story all the time. And then the people are like, what, you have to wait for them to hurt me? You have to wait for them to, smash the window of my car before you can do something?
I mean, maybe they can't interrogate him, but they can certainly ask him questions.
Right. Specifically about Carolyn. Is what you're saying.
Yeah, or where he was that night. You don't have to, play good cop, bad cop and have an interrogation light on him, but you can ask some normal investigation questions in the disappearance of a woman. You know what I mean? This was a real person who went missing. She's somewhere. Someone did something.
Yeah, some crime was committed here, and you are in the pool of suspects, or you're in the conversation of people who have been acting suspicious in connection with this person.
Yeah, in my opinion, you're probably one of two that I know of. Okay, and so let's get to the suspect number 3, which is this unnamed RCMP police officer, and this was Laura's number 1 suspect. And so he's a man from another detachment where he typically worked. And that detachment was Edson. So he was posted in Edson, Alberta, when Carolyn went missing. And Peace River's 4 hours from Edson. Now, this is a guy who did work for other detachments at times, but there's no confirmation he ever worked in Peace River, and no confirmation he was working another detachment that night. Obviously, the RCMP probably have a lot more information about that, but we did speak about how this was kind of before the computer age, so a lot of those files probably were like handwritten at that point. So might be tough to ever know for sure. So this guy apparently threatened legal action if his name was ever spoken or written about as him being a suspect. He had no known reports of bad behavior as far as being a police officer, being on duty. And look, I know not all police are great. I think, in my opinion, I think most are good. That's my personal opinion. I know that's biased. Everyone is biased in one way or another, right? In regards to this. So, but I don't know. Like, we don't have any actual reports of bad behavior from this guy.
Right. But who put this on this guy in the first place?
Suspect number one kind of thinks that a police officer did it. Obviously, he put the account out there about the police lights. He saw the police car following her. That was his account. And again, Harry Daniluk, this other officer, the first on the scene, I believe, he believes that guy is the killer. And he said that he doesn't see any evidence that a police officer could have or would have done this.
Well, that's what another police officer would say.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, there is the Blue Brotherhood, right? So we have to admit that that's a thing, right? But I have to say, if we're talking about murder, I don't think that's like a guard at that point.
No. Murder and the way it's been done, and the way that it would have had to have been done, where he's using his role as a police officer who's supposed to be protecting people. I think that other police officers might take offense to that. But like, the fact that this guy's in the conversation is kind of this insane backwards logic that you and I talked about earlier on today, like off air, where yes, he says that he will put forth a lawsuit if his name is put out there in connection with being a murderer in this situation. Like, he has to now start defending himself because this was brought to him. And I just want to read this in this article that Mr. Poignant had written, where the police officer is quoted. And he says, for some reason, this guy has put my name out there. He's got some serious issues. I don't know that guy at all. I've never heard of him, and I'm not interested in what he has to say. The person who's accusing him is so aggressive about it. This police officer says, why wouldn't he go to the police and demand an investigation into me? So he's putting that out there and saying, if you think I did this, go to the police and tell them to investigate me. And then the person who is accusing him, this is crazy to me, turns that logic on him and says, if you were so innocent, why don't you start an investigation with the police to prove your innocence? And that's the quote. Why wouldn't he go to the police and demand an investigation in order to clear his name? If he was innocent, he would have already done this, as compared to suggesting that I do it. One would think that a person with his credentials would get an immediate investigation. That's insane, bonkers logic to me. I'm accusing you, Tim, of kidnapping and murdering somebody. And you say, I didn't do that. And I go, if you're so innocent, why don't you go to the cops and get them to investigate your innocence and clear your name? And then you'd be like, you started this. Like, you can't tell me, like, why wouldn't I go and do that when it's not like, that's what an innocent person does. An innocent person doesn't just like, after one accusation, say, I need to clear my name. Like, I'm going to go clear my name. And I mean, he's making it out to be like he should have done this like the day after they found the car. Like, if that's the case, everybody should go out and start clearing their name for every crime. So in case you just happen to get accused of something, it's insane logic to turn it around like that.
So interesting there. You have people kind of pointing at each other. And then we do have a couple other people, school bus driver who made bestiality porn videos with the bus from the school district in the background of one of his videos. Very disturbing. Yeah. I mean, we don't have anything more on him, but I would say that I don't know because I didn't see the video or anything, but like why was that school bus in the back of a shot or even a frame or a moment of a shot like in this movie? Like, was that intentional or unintentional is my question, because I think if it's intentional, it's worse because he is connecting the school and his job driving school children with this bestiality. And I think that's sort of a short walk from there to, I don't know, harming kids or something like that. I don't know. You just shouldn't be driving kids. I'll stop there, I suppose. I don't want to kink shame, but that seems very disturbing.
I don't want to kink shame either, but bestiality is a little pushing the envelope for me. And you're right. Like, if he was intentionally putting the bus in there as part of the video, that's terrible. But if he just wasn't paying attention and his bus was in the video, in the background, I mean, then he's careless. Like, yeah, one's not worse than the other, I guess, but maybe like intentionally using the bus is probably a little bit more
brazen.
Yeah, brazen. Yeah, devious or something like that. Depraved, maybe. There's a certain psychological level that one has to be at to perform that.
Yeah, so we don't have any more on that person. And then number 5, this cabin owner, and apparently there was a freshly dug grave or something that looked like a freshly dug grave on this cabin owner's property that had been found by nearby hunters, some local hunters. They apparently actually stayed in the cabin without knowing that it was owned by a person. They stayed for a couple nights, I think, doing their hunting. And then when they apparently had a run-in with that man who said, don't go in the cabin, and those hunters said that there was a lot of porn in the cabin. So I don't know if that's videos, magazines, or what that is. And Laura said that the RCMP were made aware of the, quote, freshly dug grave, unquote. They claim they searched it, but we can't say for sure, I suppose.
Right. Okay, so was it homemade porn? Was it produced porn? Was it a combination? I don't know what's happening in this area. I don't know if the bus driver was selling his porn to the guy with the cabin and things were happening there. But I had a little bit of an issue listening back about so quick to call this a grave, digging a grave.
Yeah.
I mean, you can be digging something and it doesn't have to always be a grave. Maybe he's trying to hide his porn. Maybe he wants to build a bunker. I don't know.
I mean, no, you're right in that there are weird reasons that people do things, and I think every police officer would say that, and not all of these people are suspicious in disappearance cases or murder cases. Hard to say he's a real suspect. Just don't know. Not a lot of information there. The freshly dug grave could be anything.
Could be a grave for an animal.
Could be an animal grave. Yeah, for sure. So in my opinion, we're kind of back to suspect number 1 and number 2. I think those are 2 very good suspects. Now, if one of them had a history of impersonating a police officer, I'd be like, there's your guy.
Yeah.
But I just, I just don't know. We don't have that. So I don't know. I'm kind of disturbed by all these suspects, and I guess I would point at suspect number 1 first, the one who claimed to see the flashing lights.
Yeah, I mean, he's the one that created the idea that a police officer was behind this. And this could be somebody who, yes, had a light that was similar to a police car light and was working up the nerve to pull somebody over. Maybe this was something that was going on for a little while. Maybe he never did it again. Maybe he did it like 2 or 3 other times and got away with it and was practicing it. No one reported it because he didn't do anything. Maybe he just did it to build up his nerve and then asked for license and registration, watched how they did it, and maybe saw like patterns with how people behaved and just waited for the right person to actually commit the crime on and got away with it and didn't do it again. I know like that's kind of goes against some theories just in general of the behaviors of individuals like that, but maybe he did do it again and it just hasn't been connected. Maybe he said that was a little too close. The cops are a little too hot on me, so I'm tossing the light in the Peace River, and maybe those impulses he's able to control. But I think I'm with you on that. Like, this guy is the one who has a history of violence, at least one moment that we know is documented, and he created the police officer, created that whole theory, and then turned the logic around on the guy and said, if you're so innocent, why don't you try to prove yourself by having, have the police clear your name? Like, that's not how investigations work. He's using this sort of gaslighting reverse logic, which is, I've never seen that. It's so odd.
Really interesting stuff. Definitely let us know what you think on Spotify or YouTube. You can comment on both places. And hey, while you're at it, give us a good review wherever you're listening. And of course, if you're listening on Apple, you can switch over to Spotify and you can watch this too. All right, Lance, another great appearance by Laura Riste, and another head-scratching mystery that I'm going to be thinking about for days to come.
Same. And I know that something's going to come of this, just like it did with Trenny Gibson, and Laura will have some sort of update that she'll bring to us. Love these conversations because it really does make you think and make you view these crimes in so many different ways, and I think that's a healthy exercise in what we do.
All right, everyone. Thanks a lot for listening. Follow us on social media at Missing CSM.